the guy who was editor of the Babbler came to me. I guess it was actually my junior year of college. The editor of the Babbler came to me and said, I know I've heard through the grapevine. He was in my social club. He said, I heard through the grapevine that you used to write for a newspaper and write sports. And I said, well, yeah, I did write sports. And he goes, well, everybody's scared of Coach Meyer, and I can't get anybody to interview him. He goes, I understand you have a good relationship with him. I did him for a couple of PE classes, and I did get along with him. I thought it was funny. So they taught me into writing stories about the basketball team. And that's all I committed to. I did basketball. Then I wound up doing baseball, and so I worked 2 years for the Babbler as a writer, and went to law school, UT for a year. Hated it. They hated me. I hated them, and it just didn't work out. So I came back to Shelbyville and worked for the summer, and just planned to work for the summer. And then right before summer ended, the guy who was full-time covering the city council, city government stuff, he quit. And so I went to the editor and I said, do you mind if I fill his spot? And she says, no, because I want to sit out a year before I decide what I was going to do about school. So she says, no, great. And so I took his place. And then I realized I was going to go to National School of Law, and I needed to work in Nashville. So I came back to Opryland, did another book for them, and then thought I was going to work in the marketing department, and wound up that the Gaylord takeover was beginning, and rumblings of that, so they weren't going to hire anybody new anymore. So a couple of us lost jobs before we ever started in their new jobs. So the head of the PR department came to me and said, the Banner's looking for a sports writer. Why don't you apply? And I thought, what have I got to lose? So when they hired me as a photographer / writer. I did both. I was working out sports department, but I would cover a game, and I also would take photos of it. And they also had something called the zoned editions, which dealt with the different counties around Nashville. So I would go cover things in the zones and take pictures, and also write the stories as well. So I did that did I mess it up any?
No, you're good.
Okay. So I did that started doing that, and then wound up being a full-time sports writer, and ended up after 13 years there being a senior sports writer. Started out covering high schools, the South Stars hockey team when they were a minor league team. Worked my way up to Tennessee State, covered them for a couple of years, and then went to University of Tennessee, covered them, and then covered Vanderbilt. And at that time, that was the hierarchy. TSU. I also did city colleges with TSU, did Lipscomb, Belmont, and Tribeca and Cumberland, did stories on them. So that was kind of the hierarchy. You started out, you worked your way up the ladder there. There wasn't the Titans yet. There weren't the Predators yet. So Vanderbilt was as high as you could go. And so I did Vanderbilt for several years. And then, like I said, it really wasn't planning to leave the Banner, though a lot of us were beginning to feel like, what circulation are we going to hit where there's no paper anymore? There was a lot of talk about that. There was a joint operating agreement that had another 15 years on it, I think. But we just would talk about thinking, there's got to be a drop dead clause or some kind of clause in there that says if our circulation hits a certain number, they don't have to help us anymore. And so, when the job came over at the paper at home, I thought, why not? And so moved back to Shelbyville. My daughter was just a year old or 2 years old, I guess, at that time, and so moved back to Shelbyville and worked there and then I heard it was going to sell, but I just never really ever thought I'd be in journalism all my life. I mean, never. If you'd asked me in high school what was going to happen to me, I would have said I was going to be an attorney, come back to Shelbyville, work for one of the firms there, hopefully make decent money, have a little farm somewhere, and that was going to be my life. But that's not the way it worked out. So I'm glad it didn't. I'm glad it's worked out the way it worked out. But I kind of feel like Al Pacino sometimes, the Godfather, because he's just like, every time I think I've gotten out, they pull me back in. And that's the kind of way it's been with me in journalism. Every time I thought I was getting out of it for something, they pull me back in. And this is where I'm supposed to be, so I have no problems with it. But it's been good so far.
Awesome. In all the years and places you've been, what is the most memorable or exciting story you've had to do?
Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Let me think about that for just a second. Most exciting story. I guess the one that affected my career the most was my first road trip ever. They sent me to Birmingham, Alabama to cover the Birmingham Stallions and Michigan Panthers in the United States Football League. It was opening weekend. This game was the Monday night game for the new league, USFL. And they sent me down there to cover it, I guess because nobody else was available. And so it was kind of exciting, first road game. I'd been to Legion Field before for games, but never to work one. So the commissioner, Chet Simmons, who had been with ABC, was the commissioner of the league. And they kept on telling us that he was at the game, he was going to do interviews with us. And game started, no Chet Simmons. Halftime comes and ends, no Chet Simmons. So in the second half, I start walking around the press box at Legion Field's 2 or 3, I think 3 or 4 floors. So I started walking around the press box. And I see this guy sitting in this darkened room by himself. And I think, that's Chet Simmons. So I walk in and introduce myself to him and say, hey, do you mind if I watch the second half with you? He goes, no, have a seat. So we talked about what his experience had been for that weekend, stuff like that. And I was the only person who got an interview with him. And so when I came back to the paper, when they saw the story, I sent the story that night, and when they saw when I got back to the paper the next day, they were like, nobody else had an interview with him? And I said, no. I said, I only got one. And they go, how'd you do it? And I told them. And that kind of started me on my rise there. They thought, oh, wow, that's interesting. So that kind of was my turning point story-wise from that standpoint. But as far as one thing I covered Super Bowl 20, that was an experience. I had not planned to be doing it. I came into the office on a Tuesday morning to pick up. We'd had one of our writers who'd had some problems, and they'd let him go over that weekend on Sunday. And so he was covering University of Tennessee at that time. And I'd been helping him a little bit. So I come in the office to pick up a Mississippi State media guy for basketball. I'm getting ready to head to Starkville, Mississippi. So the executive sports editor says, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to Starkville. Got a game tomorrow night there. I'm going to Starkville today. And he goes, no, you're not. You're going to New Orleans for the Super Bowl. And I go, yeah, sure, right, whatever. He goes, no, you're going. I said, Joe Biddle was supposed to go, and they're going to have him doing some stuff with his reporter's problems, and he's not going to be able to go. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm ready to go start from Mississippi. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm on an airplane to New Orleans. At 5 or 6, I'm on Bourbon Street trying to look for a column for the next day. Talking to Refrigerator Perry and people like that I see on Bourbon Street because it was too late to get back to practice. So that was a interesting one to cover. As for only Super Bowl I covered as a reporter. I've been to one more, but that's the only one I ever did as a reporter. So that was an interesting situation from that standpoint. Going to Alaska for the Great Alaska Shootout was a great way to spend Thanksgiving week. Vanderbilt played up there, and we spent a week watching basketball and eating venison, chasing moose out of the driveways and stuff. That was an interesting week. But there's been a lot of things like that, but not really one thing just hugely just hits me. Eddie Robinson, the coach at Grambling, legendary coach there. I spent the day with him one time, driving around his Cadillac. Actually, no, he had a Continental. Driving around his black Continental around Grambling, talking about his history. That was an interesting day. Things. But there have been a lot of experiences like that. It's hard just to really pick just that one and say, okay, that was a great situation to be in. But been a lot of those.
All right. Going through all the stories and stuff, what's the most difficult ethical dilemma you've had to deal with in writing the story?
No question. Covering a funeral. I did one. I'll never do another one. Rex Dockery, who was then the Memphis State, was the Memphis State football coach, very popular. The Lawrenceburg Quarterback Club here in town, here in Nashville, here in Mid-State, gives out the Player of the Year awards. At least at that time, I think they still do. And Dockery was the guest speaker. Well, he's flying over in a private plane, and he crashes and dies on the way. And so he was from Cleveland, Tennessee, and they're going to have his funeral that weekend. So I'm going to UT for a basketball game. And they said, well, you're going to UT anyway. Why don't you stop in Cleveland? Just make your trip through Cleveland and cover Doc Reef's funeral. And I said, well, I'd only been in the paper for a while, a couple years maybe, and maybe 3, and still not old enough to call my shots yet. And I said, okay, sure, I'll do it. And so, I ran to a lot of people I knew, and they're crying and they're upset, and I'm asking them what they think about it. Well, of course, what they think about it. I was asking them all these questions, and they had a little press row area in the funeral, for the funeral service. The funeral director comes to, there were like 8 or 9 reporters, and he says, have a little press row area for you guys, and we're going to tape the ceremony, and we'll give you all a cassette tape at the end, and stuff like that. And it just felt creepier and creepier the whole time I was doing it. And so I wrote the story, went on to Knoxville, did the basketball game there, and came back. And on Monday morning, I came in the paper and I said, you can fire me today. As much as I need this job, as much as I like it, you can fire me today, because I said, I will never, ever cover another funeral. I said, the only time in my life, and it's still the only time in my life, I've ever been ashamed to be a reporter was covering that funeral. I said, I will never do another one. I said, now I'll call somebody on the phone and say, what'd you think about somebody passing away or something like that, which I did that a couple of times. Didn't like that a whole lot either. But because one guy called, had no idea the guy had died, and he was like, I'd wait for him to cry for 15, 20 minutes before I could talk to him. But being there at a funeral like that, being an intruder, I thought, at that service really, really bothered me. And from an ethical standpoint, just from a conscience standpoint. And so that, by far, that's the only time ever I have been ashamed to be a reporter. And I never talked to the other people that covered it, so I don't know how they felt, but I never did cover another one. And to this day, I haven't, either as a news reporter or as a sports writer.